I felt gutted the moment I realized they wanted everything I built. The HOA tried to grab my ranch. The sheriff grabbed their money. One court order flipped the script in a heartbeat, and that wasn't even the first blow. It was barely past 6 on a December morning when the pounding started. I was pouring my first cup of coffee, steam rising into the cold kitchen air when boots crunched on the frosty gravel outside my ranch house door. The sound jarred me. Around here, folks didn't come pounding that early unless it was trouble, an escaped steer maybe, or a neighbor's truck stranded in the creek bed. I set my mug down on the counter, the pine wreath over the table brushing lightly against the wall as if it too had stirred awake. Melody's algebra book lay open on the table pages, spread like wings. She'd fallen asleep there last night, pencil still tucked inside the spiral proof of another late night of studying. I tugged on my jacket and opened the door. 3 people stood on the frost-rimmed porch breath, puffing out in little clouds. In the lead was Priscilla Hayes, the HOA chairwoman. She wore her red wool coat, a silk scarf, and that kind of smile that felt more like a weapon than a greeting. In her gloved hand was a clipboard held up at eye level as if it were a badge of authority. 2 board members flanked her men. I recognized only vaguely from passing at the diner. Mr. Colton Priscilla began, voice crisp as the air. "This is official notice from the Simmons Valley Homeowners Association. Your barn has been deemed unsightly and non-compliant with community standards. You are hereby ordered to remove or demolish the structure immediately." I blinked at her. Unsightly. That barn's been here longer than this subdivision. My great-grandfather built it with his own hands. One of her allies stepped forward, waving a stack of papers as though fanning a fire. "The bylaws are clear. Non-compliant structures are subject to daily fines, effective immediately." I glanced past them at the horizon, where the pale sun was just dragging itself above the frosted mesquite trees. December light in Texas always had a hard edge, a reminder that winter here could still bite. "Fines," I said slowly. "You can't just walk up here and tell me to tear down a century of my family's work. This is a working ranch. It doesn't fall under your painted fence guidelines." Priscilla tilted her head, polished smile, never faltering. "Mr. Colton, you agreed to the bylaws when you signed the deed. Non-compliance can result in liens against the property. I trust you understand what that means." Her words landed heavier than the frost on the roof. A lien meant they were threatening the ranch itself. From behind me, I heard a creak on the wooden floor. Melody, still in her sweatshirt and pajama pants, had wandered into the kitchen doorway. Sleep still clung to her eyes, but she'd heard enough. "Dad," she asked, voice small, "are they saying we'll lose the ranch?" The question cut deeper than any fine ever could. I wanted to shield her from it, tell her not to worry, but Priscilla's allies chose that moment to wave their pages again, emboldened by her presence. Failure to comply, one read aloud, will result in daily fines of $500 accruing until demolition is completed. Further non-compliance may result in legal action. I took a breath, steadying my voice. "You don't get to dictate history. This barn is more than wood and nails. It's where my father taught me to rope, where my wife and I once strung lights for a Christmas dance. It's not an eyesore, it's the heart of this ranch." But they weren't listening. Priscilla lifted her clipboard higher as though she were raising a gavel. "You have been formally notified. Compliance is not optional." And with that, she produced a folded notice from her coat pocket, unfolded it with ceremony, and nailed it with a flourish to the oak doorframe beside me. The hammer rang sharp in the still morning air. Each strike echoed like an insult. I didn't move. I let them finish their show, the metallic thud of the nail sinking into my oak, mixing with the faint hiss of the coffee pot still warming behind me. Priscilla smoothed her glove's clipboard tucked back under her arm. "You have until the end of the week, Mr. Colton. Good day." The 3 of them turned and crunched down the gravel path, their boots leaving sharp imprints in the frost. I stood there in the doorway, heart pounding harder than the knocking that had started it all. Melody came closer, eyes wide. "What do we do now?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer, not yet, but I knew one thing. Whatever fight they thought they were bringing to my doorstep, they hadn't counted on the Coltons being stubborn as mesquite roots. I pulled that notice down, staring at the ink in the pale winter light. They wanted a fight, and I knew this ranch had seen tougher storms than them. By the end of that week, my mailbox was stuffed so full of HOA fines I thought the postman might file a complaint himself. The little metal box sagged with envelopes stamped urgent in red, each one carrying the same message, $500 a day, until I tore down the barn. I pulled them out by the fistful paper edges biting into my fingers and wondered if the postman shook his head each time he shoved another in. I laid the stack on the kitchen table beside Melody's textbooks, each envelope like a brick laid to crush us. She glanced at them once, face tight, then bent her head back to her notes. I tried to act casual, but the weight pressed in. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and decided to head to town. Sometimes the best way to learn what's really happening in Simmons Valley is not through letters, but whispers over bacon and eggs at the diner. The bell over the diner door jingled as I stepped in. Warmth and the smell of sizzling bacon wrapped around me, cutting through the cold that had settled in my jacket. The old men in caps were already in their corner booth talking football scores, their voices low and steady. Waitress Jenny gave me her usual smile, pot of coffee in hand. "Morning, Hon. You want the regular—" "Yes, ma'am," I said, sliding into a booth. "And make it strong." As she poured, I noticed Mrs. Bennet across the aisle. White curls glasses perched low on her nose, retired accountant with a memory sharper than a ledger. She leaned toward me when Jenny moved away. "Ezra, you seen the complaints they're waving around?" I nodded grimly. "Mailbox is drowning in them." Her voice dropped to a whisper, her fork poking at her hash browns. "Funny thing. They've been claiming neighbors signed those, but I've talked to 3 folks on my street. Not a one of us ever put pen to paper. Looks forged, if you ask me." That pricked my attention. Forged. Before she could answer, Harold Whitman slid in beside me. Harold was steady as stone, retired county lawyer, veteran of more hearings than most people attend in a lifetime. He adjusted his cap, opened a folder, and tapped a finger on a printed bylaw. "Listen, Ezra, they can't levy fines without due process. The bylaws are clear: 72-hour meeting notice, quorum minutes kept. Anything else is voidable. Don't let them bully you." I exhaled, tension easing just a fraction. "So, what do I do?" He smiled faintly. "Paper trail, my friend. Respond to every notice with certified mail. Keep the receipts. Start a binder. You don't win these fights by yelling louder, you win them by stacking evidence." Mrs. Bennet gave a little nod. "I'll help keep numbers straight if you need. Don't let Priscilla run you into the ground with fake math." Jenny topped off my mug again, muttering, "Whole town's buzzing about those fines." "Don't let them sour your breakfast, Hon." I managed a smile of thanks, though my appetite was gone. Through the diner window I spotted Dale and Brad, Priscilla's usual enforcers, strutting past like roosters. They paused at the counter just long enough to smirk my way. I stared back, unmoving. That afternoon, I bought a stack of manila folders, labels, and a 3-ring binder. At the ranch kitchen table, I filed each notice, slipped in the certified mail receipts, and logged dates with a pen that clicked sharp in the quiet. Melody sat across from me, her math book open, but every so often she watched the binder fill up like it was a shield we were building together. By Friday evening, I carried that binder to the community center. The HOA was meeting, though not officially. They called it an informal review. Priscilla sat at the front with her clipboard, Dale and Brad to either side. I stepped up, voice calm, but recorder clicking on in my pocket. "Mrs. Hayes," I said evenly, "I've logged every notice, every fine. None of your complaints carry valid signatures, and you've given no 72-hour notice of any hearing. Your actions aren't compliant with your own bylaws." She waved me off like a fly. "You're out of order, Mr. Colton. This meeting isn't open for debate." But the small device in my pocket kept recording each word etched in digital memory. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Afterward, outside in the cold night air, Harold walked up, folders still under his arm. He leaned close, voice low. "Ezra, I've been digging. They don't even have legal jurisdiction over your ranch." When Melody and I walked into the winter festival carrying Mrs. Bennet's potato salad, conversations died like someone had turned down the radio dial. The square smelled of tamales and cinnamon children chasing each other between booths, veterans warming hands by the fire barrel. Yet all eyes shifted toward us. Melody squeezed my hand. "Dad, they're staring. Let's just put this down," I whispered, setting the salad on the long table. That's when Priscilla appeared, cream wrap draped around her shoulders, clipboard tucked like a scepter. Dale and Brad hauled in a trifold board. "Friends," she began, voice smooth as icing. "We must protect Simmons Valley." She clipped up glossy photos, my barn, sagging trash bags, piled fences broken. Only none of it was real. Gasps spread. "Eyesore," someone muttered. Melody pressed my palm hard. I stepped closer. "When were these taken?" "By neighbors," Priscilla replied, sidestepping. But Mrs. Rodriguez moved forward. She studied the prints, then shook her head. "I walk by Ezra's ranch every morning. It doesn't look like this." A murmur rippled. Someone near the cookie table frowned. I thought I was signing a petition for crosswalk lights. Another added I was told it was for playground benches. Dale shifted uneasily. Brad fiddled with the board. Priscilla's smile stayed frozen. I pulled out my phone showing shots from last week, the barn roof mended fence upright, Melody's horse nosing the gate. The veteran by the fire barrel passed the phone down the line. "Looks right to me," he said. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice carried steady. "These complaints aren't honest. We were misled." The crowd began to nod whispers, turning against Priscilla. Even Melody's shoulders eased her first small smile in weeks flickering through. Priscilla closed her folio with a snap. "We'll revisit at an emergency session." "Truth isn't an emergency," Rodriguez answered quietly. The choir struck "O Come All Ye Faithful." Voices swelled, washing over the tension. Neighbors who had avoided me earlier now met my eyes. Small nods, tentative but real. The balance had shifted. I caught sight of the portable loudspeaker humming near the stage, waiting. Some part of me knew it would matter later. But as the tamales cooled and the choir packed up, I saw Priscilla's smile harden. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. At 2 a.m, my security camera lit up, catching the shadow of a man crouched by my fence line, wrench in hand. The alert buzzed my phone on the nightstand, a thin, insecty sound that cuts through sleep sharper than any alarm clock. I swung my feet to the cold floorboards and squinted at the screen. The thumbnail showed the north pasture gate washed in moonlight, grainy but clear enough to see breath turning to fog. I tapped and the video filled the screen. There he was, cap pulled low, a coat I recognized from too many HOA visits, shoulders hunched like a man who knows he shouldn't be where he is. He put the wrench to the hinge bolt and leaned his weight. The gate shuddered. He worked fast, practiced pausing once to look down the road. When the floodlight kicked on, he didn't run. He just turned his back to the beam so his face was in shadow and kept twisting. Dale Morrison. I knew that stance the way a rancher knows his own horses. I let the video play twice, then a third time looking for details a judge would ask about. The timestamp burned in the corner. 03:17, sync checked the day before. In the lower right, a reflection in a puddle flashed when he moved clear enough to show a glint of metal in his hand. The audio picked up the small, ugly grunt of the bolt breaking free. When he finished, he wobbled the post like a mechanic checking a wheel, then slunk back toward the road. A second figure, maybe Brad, waited near the fence line and melted into the dark with him. I felt heat in my chest that had nothing to do with the old furnace ticking on. Melody slept down the hall. For a second, I pictured that gate giving way at sunup thunder, nosing through to the road, a pickup cresting the hill at the wrong second. The kind of accident you don't forgive yourself for because a man with a wrench wanted to prove a point. I forced the breath out slow. Don't confront, I told myself. Not tonight. Not ever without a badge present. I went to the kitchen and set the phone on the table like a delicate instrument. I pulled the backup drive from the drawer, the one I'd labeled in black marker. I exported the clip, then the previous 5 minutes and the 5 after, saved them to the drive and burned 2 DVDs for good measure. I wrote the date and time on each disc and on an index card, what camera, what angle, what I observed. I slipped 1 DVD and the index card into a manila envelope and sealed it with a strip of packing tape signed across the seal. Chain of custody, Harold had said. Make it harder to argue with than gravity. The house made those old house night sounds, beam settling a far-off click of the heater, the coffee maker's clock pulsing 2:21. I stood at the window and looked toward the dark where the north gate sat. I couldn't see it from here, but I could feel it, same as you feel a loose tooth with your tongue. I didn't sleep much after that. I wrote out a statement in blue ink, careful and plain as a fence post, what I saw when I saw it, what I did next. I added still frames from the footage to the stack and tucked everything into the binder with the green certified mail cards. By 9, the frost had crisped the grass white and the sky was that thin blue we get after a hard night. I drove into town with the binder riding shotgun and my thumb drive in my shirt pocket like a medal. The sheriff's office has a wood-paneled lobby that always smells faintly of coffee and dust. There's a corkboard near the door with flyers for the Rotary Pancake Breakfast and a yellowing photo of the high school baseball team from 10 years back, caps, crooked smiles big. The American flag hung limply in the still air. The receptionist looked up over reading glasses. "Mornin', Mr. Colton." "Morning. I need to file a report." Sheriff Langston met me in the hallway. He's one of those men who fills a doorway without crowding it. Hat in his hand, expression steady. I set the binder on his desk next to a mug that said, "World's Okayest Fisherman." "Got something you should see." He watched the clip with his forearms on the desktop, not saying a word, just squinting now and then, leaning closer when the wrench bit. When it was done, he clicked back and watched again. Timestamp synced. Yesterday afternoon. Here's the sheet. I slid the paper over. He nodded, then picked up the thumb drive with 2 fingers like it was evidence already, which it was. You recognize him? He asked. I do, I said. Dale Morrison. He didn't write the name down right away. He looked at me first, and I knew why. You going to call him yourself? No, sir, I said. I'm here instead. That earned the barest half-smile. Good. He opened a fresh incident report, slid me the statement form, and turned his mug so it wouldn't sit on the edge of the paper. I wrote it up dated signed. He watched me sign, then signed as witness. He called in his deputy to make a quick copy of the drive and store it in the evidence locker. Keep chain of custody, he said, voice mild, but the words iron. Don't confront document. I won't, I said. He leaned back, hat resting crown up on the desk now. I'll file this as vandalism to agricultural property. That's not a neighborly prank. That's criminal. He tapped the paper. We'll make contact. I'm not in the HOA business, Mr. Colton, but I am in the laws and roads business. And a loose gate on a county road is my business. Appreciate it, I said, and meant it more than the words carried. On my way out, a couple of folks I knew from church came in to drop off donations for the toy drive. They glanced at the binder, then at my face, and didn't ask. In small towns, silence can be kindness when a man's carrying a load he doesn't want to spill. I stopped at the diner because it's what a man does after the law takes his report. He drinks coffee and lets his hands stop shaking around a warm mug. Christmas lights were strung across the windows, blinking in that slow pattern that never quite matches the music. The chalkboard still advertised Friday fish fry with coleslaw and hush puppies. Jenny slid the mug in front of me without asking. Heard anything, she murmured. Enough, I said. 2 farmers in caps at the counter were talking about feed prices, but their voices dropped when I walked past. In the corner, Mrs. Bennett had her ledger open like a hymnal, and Harold had a notary stamp set out beside his plate as if it belonged there with the ketchup. I carried the binder to their booth. Got him? Harold asked. Got him, I said, and showed them the stills. He nodded slow, the way a man nods when a fence line you said you'd fix is standing true. Mrs. Bennett whistled under her breath. Mercy, they've gone and lost their minds. Word moved without anyone standing on a chair to shout it. A whisper from the counter, a murmured comment from the booth by the tree, someone shaking their head by the pie case. HOA's gone too far. This time, I heard a man say. Not to me, but not to me either. I didn't linger. I drove back to the ranch and walked the fence line with a socket wrench and a calm I had to keep choosing every few steps. The hinge bolt on the north gate turned too easily stripped to metal shavings. I set a new bolt torqued to spec, added a lock plate I'd kept in a coffee can of extras, and took photos of the repair from 3 angles. Then I printed a copy of the sheriff's incident number and slipped it into a page protector in the binder. Mid-afternoon, Harold called. Filed already, he said. Sheriff's opened a vandalism report. That's official scrutiny, Ezra. Don't let them bait you. I won't, I said again. And I meant it again. That evening, when the sky went the color of old denim and the cold reached into my sleeves, I brought in the mail from the box at the road. There was the feed catalog, a church bulletin folded around an invitation to the pageant, a Christmas card from cousins in Abilene, and 1 windowed envelope from the bank. I stood under the porch light to open it because I didn't want to take its cold into the kitchen if I could help it. The paper whispered as it slid free. That evening, I opened an envelope from the bank, notice of pending lien for unpaid HOA fines. The fight had just gotten deadly serious. If they wanted every I dotted and every T crossed, I figured I'd loan them my best pen. I hung a neat wooden sign on our ranch gate, temporary closure for safety inspection per HOA request. I pinned the original letter right beside it with blue painter's tape, making sure the ink faced outward. Cars slowing on the county road could read for themselves that this circus wasn't my invention. Melody snapped a photo on her phone, timestamp glowing at the top. That'll hold in court. Harold always said, if you can prove when and where. By the time the sun burned frost off the rails, I was at Harold's front porch. He had 2 folding chairs set out, wool blanket across my knees, and a thermos between us. The coffee steamed like resolve. He slid his ruler down a copy of the bylaws, underlining lines with the precision of a man who used to bill by the hour. Section 5B, he muttered. Records must be produced within 7 days of written request. Mrs. Bennett sat across with her ledger glasses low on her nose. Look here, she said, tapping the column marked Consulting. $2,000 in November, for what no corresponding work order. She flipped another page. Legal research. They don't have outside counsel on retainer. Carmen and Manuel arrived later with a laptop. They moved quietly polite as kin at a funeral, but their screens told loud stories. These PDFs, Manuel explained, were edited after the board claimed they'd voted. Metadata doesn't lie. He printed out the property's page timestamps boxed in red. I filled my binder with the day's harvest-certified receipts from the P.O. Box delivery duplicate email confirmations, Manuel's metadata printouts, Bennett's ledger notes. I logged each into a yellow legal pad line by line, who touched it when, how it was sealed. Chain of custody, Harold reminded. If they can't poke holes, they'll try to smudge fingerprints. That afternoon, Harold rehearsed a little play on his porch. He held an envelope. Mrs. Bennett filmed on her phone. Stand where the address shows. Announce date and time. Hand it over, don't toss. We went through it 3 times until my voice stopped trembling. Then I did it for real. At the P.O. Box, the clerk stamped certified on 2 green cards. I stapled one into the binder, slid the other in my pocket. Manuel filmed as I slid the cease and desist across the counter, then the records inspection request. My hands stopped shaking halfway through the signature. We drove across to the county records office. Salvation Army bell, ringing faintly outside, children tugging at their mother's sleeves near the kettle. Inside, the clerk smelled of lemon cleaner and wore a sweater with reindeer stitched on. She glanced at the documents, nodded once. "Good record-keeping, sir," she said, as the time-stamp machine punched its mark. Back at Harold's, we stacked the binder closed. It bulged with paper neat as a brick. "That's how you fight them," Harold said. "Not shouting, not fists. Paper heavier than iron." I carried it home like a relic. The gate still held the painter's tape flapping slightly in the wind. Melody met me at the door, schoolbooks under one arm. She smiled proud when I showed her the stamped copies. For once, I felt less like prey. But when the mail came that night, another envelope sat heavy in my hand. Bank letterhead. Inside, notice of pending lien. 7 days to respond. I set it next to my coffee mug and said, "All right then." Priscilla posted another emergency session, wrong address again. I filmed the empty room and the clock on the wall so the lie would hear itself echo. The week before Christmas, Simmons Valley looked like a postcard. Strings of lights hung from porches, wreaths on every door. But the community center bulletin board told a different story. Bake sale flyers crammed between half-torn notices stamped HOA. My phone camera caught them all, dates, crooked addresses wrong. Paper lies pinned beside cookie drive promises. Sunday, the diner was so packed after service that Jenny stopped asking and just kept pouring coffee. I slid into a booth, a cardboard tube under my arm. Melody's choir robe peeked from her tote bag. She'd rushed from rehearsal. Mrs. Bennett was already waiting ledger pages enlarged to poster size. Janet Mills, retired teacher with a jaw that could still quiet a classroom, carried a neat stack of one-page explainers. "Plain English," she said. "If they can't hide behind jargon, they've got nothing." By evening, the town hall buzzed like it hadn't in years. Choir voices drifted down from upstairs, practice muffled carols mixing with the scent of pecan pies cooling in the basement. Sheriff Langston stood by the door, arms folded steady as a winter oak. His badge caught the twinkle lights. He wasn't there to pick sides, just to remind everyone order still mattered. I set the tube on a table and unrolled the first print. 2 photographs side by side, one of the empty room I'd filmed clock glowing 7:05 p.m. The other statute text underlined, "Meetings must be held at the designated community center with 72-hour notice." Murmurs rose like wind through dry grass. Mrs. Bennett laid out her poster boards, red circles around consulting and legal research payments. See here, same vendor name, different check numbers. No services rendered. Neighbors leaned close, trading reading glasses across the table. Someone whispered, "That's my dues right there." Janet lifted her sheet high. "Quorum means protection," she said. Voice clear. "It keeps a few from railroading the many. When they meet without quorum, they meet without you." She passed out pens tied to strings. One by one, folks signed a petition, not hidden, not coerced, but for transparency. Priscilla arrived in a rustle of perfume and phrases polished thin. Procedural technicalities, she said, don't outweigh community harmony. But her smile cracked when someone in the back called out, "Harmony doesn't cost $3,000 for landscaping," no one saw. I stepped to the microphone reserved for announcements, the same one used at festivals. My hands steadied as I spoke. Here's the record videos of empty rooms, doctored PDFs with timestamp statements from neighbors misled. This is our paper trail, and today it goes to court. That afternoon, I walked into the county courthouse, Melody beside me, binder heavy in my arms. The clerk behind the glass window smelled faintly of peppermint. I slid the packet across motion for a temporary restraining order to halt fines and stop the lien. Certified exhibits video metadata signatures. Her stamp clunked down time, freezing on the page. She looked up kind, but serious. Hearings in 10 days. Banks sometimes move faster. 7. Melody slipped her hand into mine, small fingers tight around my calloused ones. The holiday lights outside blurred as I thought of the ticking clock. Sheriff Langston leaned over the table and asked in that careful way of his, "Do you have clean copies of the budgets and the routing slips?" I slid the binder forward like it was a life preserver. Christmas week put a sheen over Simmons Valley, but the courthouse anteroom smelled more like floor wax than pine. A plastic tree leaned in the corner, tinsel drooping. Beside it sat our evidence flash drives sealed in tamper-proof bags, yellow pads filled with initials and timestamps. Carmen's handwriting was small but exact. Each bag bore her mark, then mine, then Harold's neat notary seal. The chain of custody read like a family Bible, names, dates, signatures marching across the page. The assistant county attorney, a woman with glasses perched low and fingers stained faintly from blue ink, checked our exhibits one by one. "Post-vote edits," she murmured, running her pen under the metadata printouts. "Budgets don't change after the meeting's adjourned. That's fraud, plain and simple." She tapped Mrs. Bennett's figures with the same finger, and the math and metadata locked together like clasped hands. Sheriff Langston kept his cap in one hand, badge catching the courthouse lights. It reminded me of that moment in the diner, the way carols played behind him as he warned me the sheriff won't put up with this. Today, he didn't have to say it. He just stood steady as oak while the attorney gathered the packet. We moved into the hallway, cool air echoing against the marble. The attorney carried the bundle toward Chambers' heels clicking. Sheriff and I waited, eyes on the tile grout silence, stretching long enough to hear the building breathe. Melody sat beside me, her mittened hand warming mine, her choir schedule folded in her lap. Minutes later, the attorney reappeared, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She held up a single sheet. Ex parte preservation order. Accounts frozen, pending review. Sheriff nodded, took the paper, and adjusted his hat like it weighed twice what it used to. At the bank, the teller's voice softened when he slid the order across. "Understood, Sheriff," she said, and carried it to the manager. I watched through the glass as monitors flickered, accounts locked one by one. It wasn't noise and confrontation. It was quiet, official, irreversible. Back at the HOA office, the notice was taped neatly to the door. Funds preserved under court order. Do not attempt withdrawal. The badge had done its work not by threat, but by law. Mrs. Bennett touched the paper, tears shining. For once, the math mattered. But victory never walks alone. As we stepped into the winter air, a commotion rippled by the bank's sidewalk ATM. Priscilla Sharpsuit and sharper words thrust herself toward a local camera. "We'll garnish his ranch within the week," she snapped. A reporter lifted her brows, but before the soundbite could land, Priscilla's debit card beeped red at the ATM. Declined. The machine spat the plastic back like a joke. The camera caught her face, stiffening eyes flashing wide. The reporter didn't have to say a word. The eyebrows told the story better than any headline. The freeze order went up on the town bulletin board right where Priscilla's glossy flyers used to hang. Folks stopped to read it the way you read the weather, with relief. A few days before Christmas, Town Hall filled early. Steam rose from coffee urns lined along the back wall. Cookie trays from the church ladies glittered with red sprinkles. Bell ringers outside swapped shifts in knit caps, their bells thudding softly through the door when it opened. You could smell wool and cold air, then coffee again. I took a seat near the aisle, not at the front. Grateful, not gloating. That was the only way to do this. The interim administrator, appointed by the court, Sensible Shoe's legal pad voice that carried without shouting, stepped to the microphone. The badge, set politely on the table beside her, caught the light like a star on the plastic tree. "Good evening," she began. "The court's preservation order remains in effect. An independent audit is underway. Board members will complete mandatory training before handling funds again." She paused, letting the words settle. "We will publish meeting times and agendas in advance and accept written questions from any resident." A sound moved through the room, less a cheer than a long exhale. People shifted in their chairs, coats unbuttoning, hats finding laps. Transparency felt like heat coming back to a room where the furnace had been off for years. Mrs. Bennett rolled a cart forward with 2 poster boards clipped upright. Before and after, she said in plain English, "Dues in, dues out." With a black marker, she drew a line between columns. Here you can see payments labeled consulting and legal research, no work orders, no invoices. Here's what it looks like when every dollar has a receipt. She tapped the clean column, then smiled at the seniors up front who were trading reading glasses. You don't need to be an accountant to follow this. If it doesn't make sense on paper, it won't make sense in life. Janet stood next with a one-page handout. Notice and quorum, she said, holding up the paper. Not to trip anyone up, but to protect us from hasty decisions. She pointed to a paragraph 72-hour notice posted at the community center and online. Quorum numbers, minutes archived and accessible. And this, she added, circling a line with her pen, a cap on legal spending without a vote of the membership. If you want to hire lawyers, you'll need to ask us first. Murmurs turned to nods. The petition pen on its string clicked and clicked as people signed up for committee's landscaping that actually landscapes welcome baskets for new neighbors, a small group to check on seniors after storms. Harold, standing near the front, lifted the volunteer clipboard and set it by the mic. It looked different there, heavy with names instead of threats. When the interim administrator called for the vote, we did it the old way and the right way. Secret ballots in cardboard boxes with tape seals. Sheriff Langston, careful as ever, watched the count from a step back, saying nothing. His coffee sat on the radiator, forgotten. I watched his eyes more than his hands. They were steady, like a man on a long bridge who knows it will hold. It wasn't close. The old board was removed. A new slate, folks with boring resumes and good reputations won by a country mile. You could feel something unknit itself. The gavel tap was just a plastic mallet on a folding table, but it sounded like a real drumbeat. People clapped the way you clap when you can finally breathe. I stood when called hard in my throat and walked to the microphone. No victory laps, I said first because it needed saying. Just thank yous. I thanked Mrs. Bennett for numbers that told the truth. Janet for rules that kept us honest. Carmen for timestamps that made liars stumble. Harold for calm and ink and wisdom. I thanked the sheriff for standing where the law stands and nowhere else. Then I offered 2 motions, a small dues holiday once the audit returned the money and a heritage repair fund to help seniors fix fences and roofs before winter storms made small problems big. We can call it neighbor insurance, I said. We all rise together. It passed with the sound of chairs scraping closer with yeses that came out like amens. The interim administrator noted the vote. The badge by the mic didn't move, but it seemed to glow warmer. When Sheriff Langston spoke, he kept it short. The investigation continues, he said. Please be patient. No one's guilty until the proof says so, and when the proof speaks, we'll listen. He tipped his hat, and that was that. Careful words for a careful moment. The meeting turned to small kindnesses. Someone pressed a sugar cookie into my hand and said, "For Melody." A neighbor I barely knew squeezed my shoulder and murmured, "I'm sorry, I signed what I didn't read." In the parking lot, people hugged breath, puffing like little clouds. The frozen notice on the bulletin board looked ordinary now, just paper and process. I carried the leftover cookies to the truck and drove home with the heater huffing and the dash lights soft on my hands. The pasture was black glass under the winter sky. I could make out the line of the barn squared against the stars. Inside the kitchen, the lamp made a small circle of gold on the table. Melody was there, hair tucked into her collar, a letter in her hand. "This came for you," she said, and passed me the envelope. The return address read Pine Valley Senior Homes. The paper inside was stiff, the kind you save for weddings and trouble. "Mr. Colton, we heard what you did for your neighbors. Our seniors are having trouble with a board that isn't listening. Could you show us what you did?" I looked past her to the winter fields and the fence line we'd mended to the night that was finally just night again. Then I felt the warmth of the mug she handed me and the steadiness of her gaze. Back at the ranch, Melody hands me an envelope, Pine Valley Senior Homes. "We heard what you did. Can you help us?" I look at the winter fields and say, "We'll bring hot coffee." On those cold December nights, a community that once felt divided found its voice again, steady as church bells on a Sunday morning. The lesson was simple, yet lasting. When rules are twisted for power, neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder can untwist them with truth and patience. Justice here didn't roar. It spoke in careful votes, honest ledgers, and hands clasped in parking lots. And maybe that's the quiet miracle that in the end the strongest fences are built not of boards and nails, but of people choosing to stand together.